Hello there. The last ecosystem. It was an interesting comment about understanding ecosystem restoration and what it is. As we know, the oceans, when you call the ocean, in fact, one ecosystem, that's very efficient. We're going to hear from three fabulous speakers in this session who will start to go below water to help us see what we don't see on a daily basis and the complexity that is life below the sea. I want to thank Charlie for doing this and putting together this video. There are two things that are very important, and we're just really going to focus on two things right now, and that's connecting, and the connections we make today and that we've been making this week are critical to the next decade. And the second thing is, it's very personal. My name is Gerald Miles. I'm the Vice President of Global Development for RARE. That's not very personal, that's a title, but oceans have been very personal for me my whole life. I've lived on 3 islands, which I think is important because this is about connecting the land and the sea. And in this forum, we're spending this 30 minutes, which is about 5% of the day, connecting 70% of the planet to this discussion about ecosystem restoration, which I think is particularly important and, again, very efficient. And if we were at all wondering why oceans were important, I'm sure many of you would have seen the IPCC report, heard the presentations about it. Literally, if we do not find the balance and figure out ecosystem restoration in relation to the oceans, what we do to restore ecosystems on land over time will not be enough. So on that note, let me bring our panelists, who actually have more to say than I do, and much more interesting. I'm going to introduce Mayor Coro from the Philippines to come up, Breanna Rose from Hawaii, and Safiya Sawney, who is representing Palau, but we could have had 4 panelists, but we're very efficient again and have 3, because Safiya's from Grenada. So we get 2 island countries, in this case talking about the 2 different oceanscapes, if you like, the Caribbean and the Pacific, for the price of 1. Now, there is another connection that I want to make in this, for this panel, because the stories here, which are very personal, go from very local action in the Philippines with Mayor Coro through to state-level action in Hawaii, through to national engagement through Palau and Grenada, and actually there's much more to Safiya's story because of the relationship of those particular countries to some global initiatives looking at how we're dealing with ocean challenges and island states. So on that note, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Mayor Coro first for this local voice. And I'm going to get them to come down just because it's a little bit more of a conversation if they stand here. And I'll push this a little forward and I'll pull that down while the mayor comes around to speak. Mayor Coro.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Alfredo Matugas Coro, Vice Mayor of the Municipality of Del Carmen, a coastal community located on Siargao Island in eastern Philippines. Allow me first to invite all of you to Siargao, recently voted the #1 island in the world for tourism by Condé Nast. No clap? Before the UN Decade of Restoration was declared, several small communities and municipalities have been slowly restoring their own ecosystems despite limited resources and science, like our story in Del Carmen. At this point, I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity today. Now, why did restoration become a developmental theme for Del Carmen in the last decade? Our threats are very simple. Our people's poor understanding of integrated ecosystem and poor governance led to illegal and destructive livelihood practices. Climate change has led to stronger typhoons. In our case, we normally end the year with a typhoon and start the year with a typhoon. And non-delivery of public services to geographically isolated areas. As a mayor for 3 terms, we changed the governance of Del Carmen seascapes and coastal communities to focus on restoration and protection of 12,000 acres of mangrove forest and 100,000 acres of municipal waters to support the livelihood of 2,000 fisher folks and ensure food for 20,000 people. How did our restoration initiatives perform? In terms of community empowerment, through RARE's Fishing for Climate Resilience project, the local government and the Del Carmen communities was capacitated to appreciate better our local resources and develop opportunities brought by climate change. These led to 100% zero illegal mangrove cutting and 95% reduction in destructive and illegal fishing practices. In terms of local governance, science and technology-based fishery and mangrove protection and management using policy innovations and behavior change methods to support managed access to marine protected areas was done. This program led to increasing fish stocks by almost 200% and a 15% increase in mangrove cover, making us the largest contiguous mangrove forest in the Philippines. In terms of resiliency, we introduced a community-based mangrove ecotourism program to reduce overfishing and a number of direct fishing-based activities. The program resulted to reduction of poverty incidence by 20% and increased household income by almost 400%, allowing families to directly address gaps in public services. And in terms of adaptation, the legislated People's Survival Fund, the Climate Adaptation Fund of the Philippines, granted $1.6 million to the Siargao Climate Field School for Farmers and Fisher Folks, and another $800,000 to build the Del Carmen multi-species hatchery. The school and the hatchery will continuously capacitate farmers and fisher folks on needed technologies and processes that would meet the demands of a changing climate. So what did we learn from this experience after a decade of our own ecosystem restoration? Restoration has to be integrated ecosystem based on seascapes and landscapes. Restoring the existing ecosystems of oceans is as important as restoring the plant terrestrial habitats. And oceans would require more science and technology in monitoring and evaluation of success. While recognizing that nature can regenerate, it is people and communities that can hasten the process of environmental recovery and ensure sustainable environmental protection. Indigenous local knowledge aided with the right science and technology, and the right education and behavioral campaign are the best solutions and methods. Conservation works only if there are significant economic gains that are recognized and felt by the people and the community. Financial literacy is a necessary component in ensuring appreciation of economic gains and resiliency. A community-based savings club is a successful model before people move to formal financial systems. When initial interventions are successful, continuous innovations to meet new demands of the ecosystem, the people, and the new climate must also be adopted. In closing, like Del Carmen, several coastal and island communities value seascapes and landscapes as an integrated ecosystem that needs to be restored and protected simultaneously. We need the Global Landscape Forum to expand discussions of massive ecosystem restorations to include bays, seas, and oceans. We look forward to the Global Landscape Forum, this forum, to lead the simplification of financing or investment access to discover new solutions for protecting ecosystems and sustain existing protected ecosystems. Let us also remember that a decade of restoration will not be enough, as it is a continuous and continuing activity that we need to pass on to the next generation. I am sure there's a lot of youth and speakers today are wanting to experience a better world than what we have now. Mabuhay, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mayor. A great sort of call to action at the end there, but I think you would agree there are already a lot of solutions, literally, that connect people, sustainable use around a resource, and the restoration, that the power that that brings to restoration, and how sustainable use around that resource can tie that back into the benefits to livelihoods, as the Mayor said. We've talked a lot about financing, and obviously there are ways in which, at a very local level in the Philippines, they're actually connecting those financing opportunities to initiatives that are working. So thank you very much. I want to give them another round of applause. Thank you. And also for winning the prize for the best island internationally. So thank you. So 3 rounds of applause for the Mayor. Now I want to invite down Breanna. Breanna Rose is a green growth champion for Hawaii, and she's going to tell us a story, maybe a series of stories, all within 5 minutes, don't worry, about island-style action. And can we connect this action on islands that is truly about seas and land to the work more broadly of land-based ecosystems? Thank you.
Aloha. My name is Breanna Rose. I'm born and raised on the island of Maui in Hawaii. And as Charlie shared in the video, oceans are both our way of life and our lifeblood. Every other breath we take comes from the oceans. As reports have shown, the next decade is critical to addressing climate change and extreme biodiversity loss. Urgent action is needed, not several years from now, but now. Oceans have a crucial role in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. There are several calls for the next decade that we can take for strong action on oceans and across all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. First is building public-private partnerships. The large-scale shifts required will take systemic change with stakeholders from across all sectors at the table. In Hawaii, we formed our public-private partnership in 2011, Hawaii Green Growth, with over 100 individuals and organizations from across government, business, civil society to address cross-cutting sustainability challenges. Together, we set locally driven priorities, track our progress, advance holistic initiatives that integrate ecosystem restoration, ridge to reef, economic sustainability, and community resilience. Public-private partnership recognized that we need political will, private sector action and investment, and civil society engagement, all to meet the challenge. Second, are commitments grounded in rigorous measurement. Hawaii launched the Aloha Plus Challenge, He Nohona Ai Oia, our local initiative to achieve the 17 UN SDGs in 2014. The Aloha Plus Challenge is jointly led by all of Hawaii's elected officials with business and civil society through the Hawaii Green Growth statewide network. When we launched the World Conservation Congress, our governor launched our commitment to effectively manage 30% of our nearshore waters by 2030, our 30 by 30 commitment in alignment with the global community. We have since launched a statewide public-private oceans initiative to help implement this goal, and we're holding ourselves accountable to our commitments. We track our local progress on the SDGs and our 30 by 30 marine commitment through an open data platform. This is hosted on a government website, but actually tracked by Hawaii Green Growth as a network for transparency. To get here, we spent several years convening stakeholders to identify local metrics, indicators, available data to measure what matters to our communities. And this year, Hawaii will be submitting the first statewide voluntary local review using our dashboard to share progress and gaps on the SDGs with the international community in July 2020. Finally, as we look at the next decade, we can learn immensely from islands and from indigenous communities in our solution making. Islands and indigenous communities have a repository of thousands of years of wisdom and sustainable resource management. These practices are innovations that can be applied to solutions for climate change and ecosystem restoration, connecting ridge to reef. Actually, just this week, 2 of our local communities from Hawaii were awarded the UNDP 2019 Equator Prize, with 20 other local indigenous and rural communities from around the world. So we were extremely excited about that. Their innovative model for ocean action was around community-based subsistence fishing areas. So this is actually a co-management structure that balances cultural, subsistence, and biological objectives developed with and by the communities themselves. This is now being applied across Hawaii, so across our state, but also being shared globally as a strategy for biocultural restoration. These are the types of models that will be critical to achieving our 30 by 30 commitment locally and globally, but also holistically achieving all 17 Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. We believe our calls for the next decade around these should be driven locally, but also implemented globally. This is why we collaborated with the Global Island Partnership and other island leaders actually yesterday at the UN to launch the Local 2030 Islands Network. This is a new global effort led by islands that will share best practices and scale successful models to advance measurable action for our oceans, our ecosystems, and the SDGs overall. The foundation of Local 2030 Islands Network are the values that make us who we are as island people. Values grounded in our deep connection to the natural world, as I think Charlie shared beautifully in the video. Through this network, we hope to share this island worldview to help connect these values to the critical decision-making processes happening at the global level. In closing, we are actually all islanders on island Earth, our precious island floating in space. The ocean connects us not only to each other across the great seascapes and continental divides, but also to our very origins of who we are and the timeless lifeblood of our blue planet. As we say in Hawaii, it is our kuleana, our responsibility and our privilege to take action that safeguards the future of our oceans, all ecosystems, and all life forms as part of the global agenda. And with that, thank you very much. Mahalo nui loa.
Thank you, Breanna. And I think on that note, all islanders, we're all islanders on island Earth. I'm going to introduce you to a true islander. So let me invite Safiya Sawney.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first start off by endorsing the comments and the stories of my fellow panelists. I'd like to also thank the organizers of today's truly valuable event. And before I start my comments, I'd also like to thank my colleagues at Conservation International for allowing me to sit in their absence here on the panel today. Since the 2017 inaugural UN Oceans Conference, the United Nations community has also continued to catalyze and strongly advocate for the incorporation of oceans and SDG 14, Life Below Water, on the international and political agenda. Colleagues, in my current capacity, I provide support to the permanent mission of Palau in the United Nations. Part of my job is support Palau's engagement within the international policy and science discussions on oceans and SDG 14. Palau sits as part of a high-level panel of 14 nations. It's a collective of heads of states and political leaders that are supporting ocean action at the highest level within the high-level panel of the sustainable ocean economy. It is truly an honor to be able to lend the perspective of a tiny South Pacific island within these discussions here today. It is also critically important that global small islands have a very strong voice on ocean action and innovation. The IPCC report on the oceans and cryosphere was recently released this week. The report warns that human communities in close connection with coastal environments, in particular small islands, are particularly exposed to sea level rise and melting glaciers, and that it is virtually certain that global oceans have warmed unabated since 1970. It further notes that the most vulnerable, like small islands, have the lowest capacity to respond. Our adaptation responses are being pushed to the limits. And finally, that sustainable development and climate change resilience depend on urgent ambitions to reduce emissions. Within the climate change discussions, the collective voice of small island developing states advocating for the inclusion of 1.5 within the governing international framework on climate change as a crucial goal in the management of global oceans was integral to the success of the Paris Agreement. Within the discussions on oceans, we are no longer simply just small island developing states. Collectively, we are global large ocean states. If I am to echo the words of President Romengasau, ocean champion and President of the Republic of Palau. Colleagues, the economies of small islands are dependent on our ability to sustainably manage our oceans. In response to the two questions posed for this panel today, on ocean actions that the decade should focus on and the big questions to consider, I'd like to draw your attention to three important points. Released alongside the IPCC report on oceans and cryosphere is a report that looks at ocean as a solution to climate change. It's this report. And it was prepared by the high-level panel that Palau co-chairs currently with the government of Norway. And it proposes 5 ocean-based solutions. The first is a focus on ocean-based renewable energy. The second is a focus on ocean-based transportation, and this refers to decarbonizing shipping. The third is a focus on coastal and marine ecosystems as a nature-based solution, and it refers to the potential of blue carbon ecosystems in the sequestration of carbon dioxide. Fourth, it looks at fisheries, aquaculture, and dietary shifts, referring to the reduction of emissions within our fisheries sector and shifting of diets to low-carbon sources. Finally, the report speaks to the potential of carbon storage within seabeds. Based on these actions, the report notes that the ability of the ocean, the potential of the ocean to reduce global emissions is 21% by 2050. In support of this report that leverages science to inform policy, the HLP members also launched a call to ocean-based action a few days ago at the Secretary General's Climate Action Summit. Secondly, I'd like the decade to consider the role of capacity building with respect to science, research, and data collection in small islands and the ways in which indigenous knowledge can contribute to innovative solution making. We often tend to look outside and not on the inside when we look for solutions on oceans. It is important to include indigenous knowledge as part of the science that supports the policy and the policy that supports our ability to adapt to climate change. Finally, it is important that as we define and implement the blue economy, we try to do so within the framework of SDGs and climate adaptation for small islands. Most of the population of small islands, as you're well aware, are along the coastlines. In some islands, it's up to 90%. Not only are coastlines the most vulnerable to climate impacts, but also our coastlines serve as a direct link to the global economy. It houses islands' highest center of economic activity and links islands to key industries like shipping, trade, and tourism that allow for economic and cultural survival. Without resilient coastlines, the survival of small islands are at incredible risk. Therefore, how can we leverage the most beneficial outcomes of the decade to allow us to develop and enhance policy solutions within an economic framework like the blue economy to ensure our cultural and economic viability? I thank you.
Thanks so much, Safiya. Now, we have 5 minutes. So this is, as I said, it's about connecting and making it personal. So with these last 5 minutes, let's connect you all to the panel with questions. I think this is an important exchange. There's a lot that's going on here about communities, smallholder fisheries, tourism development. How does that connect to what you've been talking about in terms of restoration initiatives in the terrestrial ecosystems that you've been referring to. So I'm going to open the floor for any questions. Over here.
This is a question that is a portion of reflection on the whole day, and I'm going to use this opportunity to ask that. The issue of land degradation and ecosystem restoration is an issue that's very, very important. I mean, it affects almost half of the population of the world, and I think I'm trying to channel my inner child thoughts and questions, but in terms of actions and commitments from countries, how feasible is it for countries to include this kind of things in the constitution? We have human rights in constitutions. We need to have, and we're talking about justice and the importance of justice. How feasible is this to advocate for inclusion of this kind of rights so that countries and companies can be sued and also can sue if any organization is trying to violate this law? So how feasible is this?
A really interesting question. I think we've got some experience on the panel, or at least some responses to that. Really, how do we embody some of the ecosystem restoration or principles of that within legal or constitutional framework? Anyone? Safiya.
If I can just start off. So part of what a lot of islands have been doing recently in considering developing their blue economies is also looking at what blue policies would look like. So development along our coastlines, obviously that needs to be supported by legislation, and that means that the government has to sort of take a role on ensuring that the legislation that they create supports the kind of development, the sustainable development that they want to see. So in response to the question, part of what's been happening is, aside from science being used to inform policy, we're looking, outside of science, we're looking to legal counsel, we're looking to other countries that have done it before, using those benchmarks and integrating it into our indigenous policy creation processes. And in terms of, I guess, when you talk about the finances, to be able to protect and effectively implement marine protected areas in terms of the oceans, for some countries, it's something like $150 million per year. So obviously, there's certain implications that we have to consider as well.
So we have one more minute, but let's hear from Mayor Coro, and then I'll wrap up quickly, possibly.
If I may add to that, land is technically owned by government. So in terms of constitutional mandates, most of the government has already included land. It is how we manage our land that's very critical. And that's why we are in this space trying to understand and appreciate more how we should be managing our land. When we move the land to a bigger scape, which will now include seascapes, there are existing policies and a lot of new innovative policies that are being introduced in countries, in local governments, even in communities. And even if there are no actions in terms of high government level, I think we need to look into how we can help out in terms of our local communities, in terms of our local spaces, as these small actions can collectively influence already the needed changes that we want to see in this world right now.
Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up. Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions. So on behalf of RARE and Conservation International, who've sponsored this segment, it's our pleasure to have started to make this connection. I've got the big stop sign. I would just say that there will be opportunities at the Blue COP coming up, where there'll be with the Global Island Partnership, a coastal fisheries working group that will start to look at coastal restoration. And as Safiya said, Conservation International are working with a number of partners on blue carbon, and there will be a report out shortly on that. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.